What's up, yo? I'll wait till more people come in here, and then we'll set it off. Yeah, I'm sorry about yesterday. We had a little family emergency. Yeah, we had a little family emergency yesterday. But I'm here. Uh, got a new website coming. A bunch of other shit I'm gonna announce. See about getting everybody in here. All right. So here's an interesting thing. I was offered a series of tours, and they're for next year. And a lot of these are in places where they don't require like certain papers. But I've seen it's an interesting development. The underground and the commercial world are being split in that way, where in the commercial world you have to have like all these vaccine papers to get into those big festivals. But in the underground circuit, it's a lot more kind of open-ended and based on the venue and the independent contractors that own it, as opposed to it being part of a larger corporation. So I'm seeing a lot of artists get shut out of shows, and it's just crazy. Someone asked me, but yeah, we're gonna make sure that we get out there to people. ¿Por qué dejaste de hacer música? He asked me, why did I stop making music? I didn't. I stopped releasing it, but I never stopped making it. So let me just clarify that for people. I never stopped making music. I haven't released anything recently, but I'm always making music. I'm always writing something. I'm always writing songs, writing screenplays, anything and everything. Yeah, man. So yeah, global tour coming when I finish what I need to. Got some new vinyls. Like I said, the new website, new shirt, new studio, new everything. Yeah, usually people ask a ton of questions. People ask me and they say, drop the fucking album. Here's something else that a lot of people ask me for, and they wanted me to comment on this, because we've actually commented on everything. Like if you ask me about mandates and vaccines, we covered that in the past 3 episodes, right? People ask me, why don't you do songs with people? Yeah, I really don't usually do records with people. It has to be some kind of hookup or something. And there have been times in which I gave someone a verse and they didn't fulfill the their end of it. So, that has to get worked out too. But it's not just that. It's really about me feeling the concept of the record. It can't be just some gratuitous whatever, or this is like the revolutionary song from my record. I need to check that off. So let me go get Technique. And it's like, no, I really want something that I listen to that blows me away. And if it's not that, then, what's the point? I'm going to be in LA on November 12th. So hopefully we'll have Poison Pen and Chino there too. Someone wrote Live Life Claim. Live life, claim what? This is why I don't read the messages, because people will just, it's like mind vomit, right? Yeah. I think everyone became an expert in everything, right? Like after 9/11, everyone became an expert in the Middle East and geopolitics when they're not. Right? During the pandemic, people became a medical expert. You're not. We did realize that the government overreached in both of those instances by using something that they can fearmonger people for, but that they can gain more control over society for. I'm sorry to share those unpleasant truths with you, but that's the way that it is. I think that one interesting thing that I see is that the majority of people who are against the vaccine openly, someone asked me about that here, it's not that they're right or left, but a lot of people in the mainstream happen to be right-wingers. And one of the interesting things I saw is there was a guy who's running for Congress in Ohio who's big on the anti-vax stuff, but is a total hater of immigrants and said that Christopher Columbus was a hero. And I remind people, yes, there are two wings of the same bird, but certain sides of the political spectrum here in this country have allegiances, and because they're tied into those allegiances, they betray the core values that they have. So you'll see conservatives that say, oh man, having kids in cages is bad, but there should be no but. The reason there has to be a but is because Mr. Trump did that, irrespective of how much he wants to blame Mr. Obama. For liberals, it's different. Liberals pretend to be outraged and shocked, like, I didn't know that was going on. Yeah, you did. Don't lie. And I think that when people look at the contrast, it's not really red pill versus blue pill, because you're taking into account the idea that the matrix applies here. And if the matrix applied here, then you wouldn't take the red or the blue pill, right? The red pill doesn't mean, oh, we acknowledge conservative politics and that's the way to beat these people. The United States is not becoming more like China, right? If you see the United States become more authoritarian, that's different than becoming more leftist. When Columbus came here, when all those slave masters came here, the booklet that they used to colonize and commit a genocide larger than Hitler's had nothing to do with the Communist Manifesto that had even been written for another 350 years. You can have authoritarianism and imperialism and genocide and murder without having any of the modern facets of political ideology that exists now. Because at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is people trying to monopolize resources. Now I'm going to tell you some interesting shit. We were having this discussion at Indigenous Peoples Day. Si tú trabajas de hoy día, right? Desde el día de que crucificaron a Cristo hasta hoy día, y no faltas un día, y te pagan $1,000 al día, right? True story. If you worked every day and didn't take a day off from the time that Christ was crucified until now, $1,000 a day, you still wouldn't have half of Jeff Bezos' money. It's not about working hard. It's about working smart and monopolizing resources. Oh, shit. Look who's in the house. Lupe Fiasco. Let's see. Immortal Fiasco. The Immortal Fiasco show that y'all love so much. I invited this dude in here. Oh, shit. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the official Immortal Fiasco podcast.
Hey, don't be recruiting me for your shenanigans. See, I do.
Yo, you've been sending hate mail to Kyrie Irving. I found out, yo, it's you. You created a profile to troll him. for his decisions.
Wait, let me put on which Illuminati hat should I put on for this one? Let me peruse my selection of hats.
I caught
fine.
that. I
I'll
caught
put
that
on
too.
this one, right? Yeah, there we go.
It's too much. It's too much,
Can't
man.
spell Illuminati without MIT. What's up,
You
Tech?
know, I think one of the big things that people miss about Illuminati is that if you want to see it function, and I think we touched on this before, you just have to go to the corporate boardroom where you're not allowed to be in, right? They don't tell you what's in the vaccine, but they don't tell you what's in McDonald's Big Mac sauce neither. Like, irrespective of what it is in this society, they're not going to be open with you. They're not going to tell you for your own benefit. They're not going to say, hey, let's stop using high fructose corn syrup because it kills people's brain cells, you know?
Okay, I will do a little bit of a pushback, just a little.
Please.
'Cause
That's why we're here.
I don't want you fucking me up on some dirty Bronx street corner.
Jesus Christ.
I want you gym star to the face for going against your word. No, but you know what I've learned, and this is literally over the past like maybe the past like month or so. That a lot of the information, especially for publicly traded companies, is out there, right? Because they have to publish it, right? So it may not be as deep as like, the secret sauce, proprietary like that, but the general gist of like what is in things, what are things for, what's the goal. I mean, they have to be if they're going to be a publicly traded institution, which majority of the companies that we come into contact with are in one way or another. It's just that where do you get the information from? So they all publish their prospectuses, their corporate situations. I sit on boards of certain companies, and there is certain information that's, when it's a private company, it's nobody's business. But when it's more of a publicly facing thing, I mean, you can get a general sense, and in some cases, you can get a very direct description of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they're not bashful at all. So I think one of the things that gets a little bit maybe too much of our interest is how many secrets are really out there. It's just that people don't know where to look, right?
I think just to angle off what you said, not even to go against it, but what I found one of the most interesting parts of history that is kind of wiped out is that after World War II, a Republican named Eisenhower was the one that taxed corporations to like almost a 90 to 95 percentile rate in order to recover from World War II. And I think that what he said was, listen, you guys have war profiteered and you've made money in a way that is, pretty unconscionable. He was very, very blunt with them. Like, how old white people were back in 1951. Like, yeah, listen, unconscionable. All right. And he gave a speech about the military-industrial complex, too. That's pretty famous. But his analogy was that these companies, irrespective of whatever secrets they kept or held, what's not a secret is how much money that they're able to make because of their special relationship with the United States. And I think that is where the global left has unfortunately lost, because here in the United States, we have a center-right party like the Democrats, because the idea of workers of the world unite doesn't really play here. The people that I've met that are on the corporate left of the United States, they're asking for a larger slice of the pie, right? But the reality is that they're not asking what's in the pie or how this was done or if this is legitimate. And I think that, there have been too many instances where, sure, these companies have their secret sauce and they have their way of kind of operating internally. But I think what is the next step in that evolution is examining the way that they definitely don't publicize the deals that they have to make with companies, or excuse me, countries that they kind of extort for these natural resources. There, we have no idea what they're backing. And we know for damn sure if there's something fucked up in that country, someone either has to turn a blind eye, or if you're in business, you have to fund that. You become part of that, which was why last week's discussion was so much about the separation of church and state and how that's not really done from a spiritual perspective, not done for the protection of the state from the church's influence, but for the idea that God in any society or spiritualism in any society needs to be protected from the idea that it's corrupted anytime it touches government. So if we have a religious government, we need to be closer to God. Sure. We need to bring prayer in schools, whatever. Okay, now you're getting crazy because I know what the next step is. Well, this isn't our war. This is God's war. God wants us to win this war, right? We're not doing this terrible thing to immigrants because we're a fucking foolhardy, selfish nation. No, God has ordained this. No, it's not that we don't have health care because we're greedy people who, you know what I mean, don't want to take away a yacht from some asshole. It's, hey, man, God has set this up to be the way it is. Why don't we change the filibuster or the Senate? God ordained there to be, and the problem, Lupe, is that when you get with these religious folks, and this is what I think people need to be aware of when they play that left-right paradigm.
Mm.
The right wing is dangerous, bro, because when they talk in the middle of them arguing with you, they break out into prayer. And that is, I guess it's inspirational for them. But for people that aren't religious folks, if you're losing a debate and the person you're arguing with suddenly breaks out, you're winning a debate and the person you're beating suddenly breaks out into prayer and all the people that are with them start praying too, that doesn't mean that they won. That's their way of saying, hey, fuck you. We don't care what your opinion is. We're going to keep bulldozing over you and we're going to deny everything about the society as fucked up. But I mean, your take is what? That the corporations themselves still have to divulge massive amounts of information if they want to partake in business in the United States.
Yeah, and at least in the publicly traded format, right? And so, you know, I got a couple case studies that I've been doing the past like couple weeks. I'll give you a really great example that ties in to one of the pieces that you spoke on in terms of like secrecy, government collusion, and all this other old stuff, but not collusion in the sense of like a nefarious collusion, but just,
I'm sending you the files.
You know, government has influence, you know, responsibility for certain things, right? So I read the CIA fact.
The harmonies. Sorry.
Look at this.
No, I'm in the studio. My fault.
Puerto Rico. So anyway.
Puerto Rico. You should know better, man. You know better. You know better, man. You know the difference in Latin American countries, man. Don't do that.
Disrespectful Cuban mother. And so, hey. He's like, yeah, so what you saying? Yeah, let me get a large pizza.
Nah. Come on, man. I'm in the lab right now.
I don't want to speak, Dick. Listen. So, Pete, right? So I'm a big proponent of promoting the CIA World Fact Book, right? Just for the general consensus of, just so they know, like, yeah, there's a lot of mythology. A lot of that mythology is sometimes used against us because we're predispositioned to kind of like have more of an affinity for the unknown, right? And the kind of blurry edges things. We find those things most interesting as opposed to the literal fact, right? So the reason I like read the CIA World CIA Fact Book, and it's online. You go CIA.gov, it's there. It's just as a resource, like it's interesting just to see kind of real time kind of data and things about the world, and specifically how, you know, the U.S. and the U.S. intelligence agencies frame the rest of the world, right? Not necessarily to agree with it or not, but these are some of the official framings, at least what's exposed to the public, right? So there's a lot of data in there, a lot of kind of things that you might consider to be trivial depending on what type of perspective you're coming from. So like they'll have country comparisons, right? Of like railroads, right? Airports, you know, this country is number one, this country is number two. And some of the stuff is fascinating for various reasons, where it's like, you know, America has 13,000 airports, or what you consider to be airports, airfields. You know, the definition is everything ain't got to be like an international fucking LAX to be considered an airport. So America has 13,000, right? The next one down is Brazil with like 8,000 or something like that, right? So you think like, oh, China's like number 5 or number 6, right? So you think from a population standpoint to like the infrastructure and the services, and it's like that for railroads, it's like that for roads, it's like that. You would think like, nah, China got to be number 1 in everything, or this country has to be, or India, this, that, and third. It's like, nah, America got all kinds of shit to service a population that's a fifth of the world, right? Or 5% of the world's population. So anyway, little things like that. But the case study I want to bring up to you was I was just looking through the country data, and I was looking at the Bahamas, right? And then I was looking, they have the import-export data, right? Trading partners, right? Like who they trade with, who they don't. So the Bahamas, one of their major trading partners is Namibia, right? So I'm like, that okay, I guess, right? But like 28%, right? So when you go to you go to Namibia and you look at like, okay, who's Namibia trading with? You know, they're not really trading with nobody. You know, they got natural resources, but it's like China. But it's like, why would they have this strong kind of relationship with the Bahamas, right? And what is the Bahamas actually generating to send to Namibia? And so I do some other little searches to see like what the industries are. And it was a spike in like 2019 where you had $480 million worth of trade done between the Bahamas and Namibia, right? But before that and after that, there's like just flat.
Right.
So interesting, you know, you look through the other data for the Bahamas and you see the staff of the US Embassy. So the staff of the US Embassy was this one woman, right? And she was in charge of just kind of like, not necessarily the ambassador, but she was in charge of kind of like running the embassy, doing little things and stuff like that. She has a history where she worked in the Middle East doing like, you know, criminal kind of investigations in different spots and places and stuff like that. So anyway, she left her post in the Bahamas in like 2017, right? 2018, right? Guess where she goes?
To Namibia?
To Namibia.
Okay.
So she becomes the ambassador for Namibia, the U.S. ambassador for Namibia. So her leaving from the Bahamas to Namibia, there's this giant spike in trade, right? Worth $450 million, right? And so it's like, what was that? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the play in the piece with that? You know, like how does that? And she was appointed by Trump, just FYI, you know. But a lot of these ambassadors, they're career kind of employees, and they've been around for administrations. So it's not like a political kind of thing. But when you think about like a person gets moved from one country to another country in an official role, and in that year, you see this increase in trade, right? But prior to that, there's nothing. After that, there's nothing. But in that one position, so it gets the wheels turning. Like, well, what was the offer? You know, what is her piece? What is her play? And you know, what is the strategic advantage of being that part of the world? What are the other players in that space? And you think of Namibia, their main kind of resource is uranium, right, and kind of nuclear fuels, and their main trading partner when it comes to their uranium is China.
Of course.
So America has nothing to do with that. So is this America finding a way to get into Namibia in some way or somehow financially, economically? Yeah. And the investment would be shipbuilding, right? So Namibia has a large coast. They're on the coast of very large coast. But their fishing industry is very, very underdeveloped. So for various reasons. So the play in my mind, the analysis that I did was that, you know, you have this ambassador who works in more of a criminal investigative capacity. So she deals with the scum of the earth type shit, right? Who gets appointed as ambassador. What does Namibia need or is undeveloped that is monopolized by China or another country? Or that their fishing industry is underdeveloped, right?
Right.
So let's send them $500 million in trade dealing directly with their fishing industry, and maybe we could use that as some type of leverage, you know, with the government to balance out whatever geopolitical play we got going on with China and nuclear fuel and uranium, and just to put a check in the space.
Hmm.
And that's just from looking at data. You know, that's just looking, fumbling through, you know, data that's in the public, that's publicly available. You can do a couple more little searches to see exactly what was being traded, what the numbers were, who this person is, what was her background. But it's that layers of due diligence that I think people kind of get caught up in. I think people just like to see the initial, right? Like the very initial kind of top layer of information very quickly. And then they don't do the secondary boring shit that you do to really either verify or come to a real solid theory about what the plays are.
Right.
And they just say, "Oh, I don't want to do that work, so it's a secret." You know
Right.
what I'm saying? That's my
No,
take.
yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff where, listen, people could spend their entire life, imagining that they're up against this overarching evil because the evils in their life are a lot more difficult to confront, especially the ones in front of them. Like on Indigenous Peoples Day, I got some hate mail from someone where wrote me and they were like, "Oh, you and that movement to let illegals in this country that are like raping and killing people." And I said, "Well, listen, brother, I hate to be the bearer of bad news for you, but someone in your family is more likely to be raped and molested by a member of the family than by a stranger or the reality that you want to project in this society, right? Even if we go with your example of the ambassadors, all of those ambassadors are there to push the agenda of whatever country they're the ambassador of. So they have to have some kind of power, right? Now, some of them are obviously CIA agents, right? That's not a conspiracy theory. They're
Right.
openly worked for the agency or they work for the military in some capacity. If you used to be a colonel or a brigadier general and now you're the ambassador of some shit, then we know what you're doing there. Also, you have a staff of people whose job it is to try and influence whatever you can. I think that the way the world is structured now, um, there is no moral capacity. There is no moral compass, right? It's just like the rules in space, right? There's no north, east, west, south in space. There's no right or wrong. It's just what is and what isn't. And when you look at borders, what are they? An imaginary line on a rock floating in space. And this government has come to terms with that, happily so. And so has the adjacent and some of the, parallel governments that exist next to us. They are lining up with who they think will be the dominant mover and shaker on the world. I think the world stage, though, has to abandon morals in order to play that game, right? So if you are looking at it from a United States perspective, well, we got attacked on 9/11, and the countries that we decided to revenge ourselves against were actually the proxies of either China or Russia in some way, shape, or form. When it came to Afghanistan, the conversation that we had last time, you know, we also barely touched on the fact of its geographical positioning, the fact that it actually shares a border with China. When it comes to the Middle East, uh, uh, what we didn't talk about last time is all of the Ba'athist governments and go in depth into what the Ba'athist party actually was. Whereas, you spoke eloquently about how Namibia has these long connections to China. The Iraqi government, through Saddam Hussein, some of the other governments that existed in the Middle East that before they were toppled, they had not as close a relationship as Assad had to Russia, but a close one in which they were kind of structured after this socialist model. And what's interesting is that even Israel was structured that way back when it had a kibbutz system, and its major partner was the USSR before the United States stepped in after the war in 1967. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, there 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 is very much so this game that people go back and forth and play, where the United States will say, well, look at the Uyghur Muslims. And I'm very sympathetic to that. But if I look at the Uyghur Muslim people, you know what I see, Lupe? I see that many of them resemble the people who look like the people who I had been marching with at the Indigenous Day festival. The people that were asking for their land back, asking for the United States to do something. And I think that's where people lose me, where they take the conspiracy theory stuff and they apply things from other countries to this country as if we need them to complete the metaphor for how fucked up America is or Canada. Like you had a whole school where you stole people from where they were from to re-educate them, recondition. Isn't that what the Native American residential school is? Isn't that part of what Illuminati is to you kids that are watching this that don't want to take either a vaccine or you don't want to be somewhere else? But you didn't see that coming when they were taking people out of their homes to re-educate them to not be as native. I think what people tend to forget is that whatever horror or unspeakable, unseen terror, imaginary communism they're fighting. What they're really fighting is unfettered capitalism that exists in this country, and it's not Chinese communism that's coming to destroy you. The Chinese have their own fucking problems. They have climate change that's destroying their ecosystem. They have an overpopulated mainland. They're trying to actually build in the South Sea to build more places for fucking people to live. They're running out of space. The United States has its own problems. It has its authoritarianism and a long history of oppressing people without bringing up Mao Zedong. Before Mao Zedong, Europeans were doing horrible shit here. Before Karl Marx was swimming in his father's nutsack, these people engineered systems to torment and fuck people up. So how can capitalism be the savior is my question. Sure, it's the system and the functionality within where we work, but similarly to the way I see now, like we can have our own opinions on mandates or vaccines, but when you look at nurses who worked through the pandemic with nothing here, and now you're not allowed to work because we have to make sure that you got this, where we didn't have to make sure you had that before, right? There's no morality and there's no, I should say, there's no consistency. So that has always been my problem with choosing nationalism as a political identity. You're asking me to sacrifice consistency. So when people say, oh, you hate America, I think you're just used to having no consistency, so you can't see the difference between hating and asking someone for accountability, right? It's like dealing with an alcoholic parent. I don't hate you. You're my mom or dad. I'm asking you for fucking accountability. Oh, by the way, you're not really my dad. You stole me when I was a little baby and you raised me in a fucking horrible way. And I want some accountability. I'm not even asking you to return me to Africa to my real parents or Latin America. I'm asking you to admit what you did wrong all those hundreds of years ago. Or how about 10 years ago when these schools closed? Like, that's it. I think that's what gets mistaken for hate or anger or rage against the system. People didn't need white liberals to come to the ghetto and rebel rouse us to make us feel how badly we've been treated by police. We didn't need that. We didn't need Marxists to create a BLM movement for us to realize how horrible this was done. We didn't need cops to point out that those people are Marxists for us to realize that those cops don't give a shit about us, and that every time they post from those burner accounts when they see black crime and they say, where's BLM? And I'm laughing and I'm saying, yo, aren't you on duty right now? Why are you posting from a fucking bullshit burner account? Shouldn't you be at the 26th precinct taking a break from taking a break? Instead you're online tormenting black and brown mothers who have lost their children, and you've accomplished nothing. But you're going to need us when a woman gets raped. Ask any woman who has ever had a problem with a man stalking her or been sexually assaulted. Ask her about the easy nature of going to a police station and talking to the cops who, A, don't take her seriously or treat her like shit. And I think what people don't get is that when they discuss defunding police, they don't mean, hey, take the money away and give it to crackheads in the street. No, we mean give it to people who would actually be like a mental health agency. Police got no business dealing with a person having a psychotic bipolar episode, because you're only trained to shoot them and detain them. And they may need to be tranquilized and sent to a detox because they may be dealing with a multi-layered issue. Maybe drug addiction on top of mental illness. I'm dealing with one of those situations in my family now. And it's like, we don't want them to be doing social worker work. That's not what you're there to do. It's like what happened in Iraq. Don't the police realize that if cops are watching this show, even though I you know that Lupe may be sympathetic to you, but I don't like you. But the point I'm trying to make is, even if you're watching the show, don't you realize they're using you the way they use the soldiers in Iraq? That's not your job. to be a police officer in Iraq. Your job was to be a soldier, to knock a country over and leave. You stayed and drove back and forth up and down the road of Afghanistan until someone shot at you. That was the mission. That's what they turned you into, a fucking cop, and you're a clown for that. And this is what you still getting fucking $30,000 a year and a fucking $1,200 credit at a state school for. This is what we did. That's the fucked up part. And then people call that freedom. You can listen, if you got producers, the type of people that will create the biggest caricature of another country, and you ask them to do America, man, I don't even know what they would come up with. You know, you talk about Saddam's rape rooms. We got that here in state prison. You talk about torture facilities. We got those. You talk about locking kids up. Oh my God, you can Google that. Child prison to pipeline, school to prison pipeline. Everything bad that you bring up about another fucking country, which is my frustration when people say, oh, you don't like it here, you can go somewhere else. Okay, yeah. You know, my car broke down. Let me just leave it in the highway. You know, my kid's sick. Let me let him die and have another one. No, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to fuck you up. And I'm going to keep pushing to fucking change things. And hey, brother, I always say, man, we could agree and disagree about stuff, but as long as we keep pushing forward, like, the purpose is to keep pushing forward, to keep pushing the envelope. You know, like we had the conversation last time. If even if we don't like a person whose politics are way out there, you know, some of the people are the canary in the cage. They warn us for all the extracurricular lunacy that other people are doing. And then there are people that take it too far, and that you and I could point to and be like, all right, dude, well, we know that you don't really have any actual facts to back this stuff up. It just sounds good. And like you said before, it plays well in some of these revolutionary conversations. So someone can just say something discounting, or, oh, this guy, he's trying to get us to do things the government does. And, you know, and then I hear people like commentators on TV who are definitely elites calling other people elites. And then, you know, by the time people have been suckered into that, it's hard to reach them because they've already chosen a side in a puppet show, right? They haven't realized it's a puppet show, so they've chosen a side. You know what I mean? Like, you know, when you do the hip hop shows and you say, "Hey, this side, I know you louder than this side." You know what I mean? Like that, bro. Yes. We've been on stage together. We've had to pull into the bag of tricks when there's a mishap with the mics, Lupe. You say, "Hey, this side, is you louder than this side?" Yeah, this side. That's what they do to y'all all day. Y'all fucking fall for this shit, man.
So look, I got two pieces in the midst of your long ass rant. I think we're gonna do this. We need to have timers, okay?
All right.
You went to 80 different layers. So two things that stood out, right? Which I think are important. The rest I think is third. No, I'm just joking. So the rest of that shit is bullshit. But the two things are most important. But nah, one is that mental health piece, right? About the police and that whole kind of construct, right? One of the things that I think people need to be cognizant of, and again, I'm not telling people what to do or not to do. I don't give a fuck. But there is this, where did that come from and why, right? And as you think about your next move, understand that the move, the state that you're dealing with right now is because a move was made, right? A revolutionary, if you want to call it that, evolutionary move was made in a period of time as an attempt to solve or address a certain problem. And then the consequence of that problem is something that we're dealing with today, right? Problems never go away. They just get moved along, right? And it's really for the people within that time. So some people don't know what white people were like in the 50s because motherfuckers was born in the 80s, right? So some people can't relate. Some people can't relate.
Yeah, man. If you don't know, man, you ask an older black person, be like, oh, no, you think entitlement is strong now. Like, these motherfuckers wanted to use you as a rickshaw, you know?
But the general piece is like, you know, certain events and certain issues and certain things are contextualized to a particular period of time, which can be learned from a historical thing or maybe from a tactical thing, but they're not necessarily going to be a custom fit, you know, every single time to every single generation. So you got to kind of compartmentalize things where they are that make sense and not trying to wholesale take some shit that happened in the past and try and reinvent that shit right now, right? So the mental health piece, right, and the police and all that. one of the reasons that you have, at least in California, where you have a lot of people in the streets, right? Like people that are uh, mentally ill, just to call it what it is, and schizophrenic and manic depressive and all of this stuff like that, was there was a movement to kind of shut down the asylum systems, right? Because you had these like issues where there was a lot of abuse in certain places, or there was a sense that, you know, these things are like prisons. You just house these people up and dope them up and keep them locked away, and that shit not cool. And there needs to be a certain level of freedom and this, that, and the third. And some of the people that were kind of pushing these causes, you take things like Scientology, for example, right, which is heavily anti-psychiatric, right? And it may be looked at, oh, they're just this religion, they're just these weird, you know, blah 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 blah.
Are they a religion though?
Yeah, I mean, they're religion. So we can get into that later, but because I think all these religions are full of wild ass nonsense. But it's let me stop. The thing about that is, just because they are this religion, whether you agree with them or not, they actually have money and an agenda and can lobby and can get things pushed through in a very technical sense that affects you directly, whether you're part of that religion or not, right? So that the Scientology movement, for example, is very much so about, you know, being anti-psychiatrics, right? They, for whatever reason, they feel that shit is whack. Whether some of the founding members went through it and got abused in that system, which happens, right? You get some of these cult leaders, if you do a little bit of research, you see that they were in psychiatric institutions and all this other old stuff. They come out with a certain influence and a charisma, building the movement, get some real money behind them, even if it's just a few people, right? And then they're able to craft and push agenda, right? So one of the reasons that you have a lot of these folks having mental issues in the streets is because a lot of these asylums were closed, right? A lot of these mental health institutions were closed, right? And they were closed with kind of two things. Okay, now we have these medications, right? So you bring back in pharmaceutical industrial complex, all that stuff, but we have these medications, right? We don't really, you can self kind of medicate now, right? It doesn't need to be an extended kind of treatment therapy. We ain't got to do all this extra shit. You ain't got to worry about, you know, abusive gods. You ain't got to worry about, you know, being committed and shit like that. Not to say that there's no mental health institutions, because there still are, right? There's still people getting committed. There's still people going through shock therapy, all kinds of shit, right? And there's some people who kind of need to be in those spaces or are forced into those spaces because their family don't know how to deal with them, right? Trying to deal with it on their own is just way too expensive. It's, you know, it's all kinds of shit that go into shit like that, right? But you get a grouping of folks who get released into the streets with some pills, right? And with no kind of regard, because, you know, the society don't really give a fuck, right? And not just on the institutional level, but person, people kind of don't give a fuck about each other, right? Like, if you my cousin, that's different. But even if my cousin, my nigga, you need to get a job, because you ain't finna keep sleeping on my couch. Your cousin, like, nigga, where the fuck am I gonna go, right? So there's a certain kind of disdain and lack of empathy. So you push these people out into the streets, and, you know, they may take their medication, they may not. You know, some people have relapses. Some people literally forget that shit. Some people like, I'm not taking this shit because it makes me feel like shit. Like, there's all type of reasons why people don't take their medication. They want to feel normal, right, etc. So you get that kind of piece, right? Again, a series of kind of layered responses to an issue, where the conclusion becomes, okay, let's close down some of these institutions. Let's give these people a certain amount of freedom, right? And then we'll deal with the consequences later. And fortunately and unfortunately for some people, that was a great thing. Unfortunately for some people, it's not. And they're going to interface with the police, right? And I remember watching this thing where the police were doing all these interventions in down in Skid Row. And kind of the captain who was in charge of that piece, he's a real cool dude. He wasn't like he wasn't like come off a shitty cop, nothing like that. He was just like, you know, I'm tasked with police in this area, black dude. And he's like, man, we just the tip of the spear, but we're a spear, right? He didn't say we're the tip of the psychological survey, we're the tip of the social work. That nigga said we're the tip of the spear, right? Because as much as it may seem like, you know, you just got people in the streets that need to be talked down out of a situation. I mean, they pulling up to murders, rapes, stabbings, beatings, all kinds of shit happens, you know, and whether it be from somebody having a relapse or a breakdown, a psychotic episode, a drug fit, whatever it may be, right? So it's not all like peaches and cream, you know, down in some of these places where these folks congregate. It's kind of fucked up, you know. So you get these kind of overreactions, and in some cases you get underreactions where the police like, I'm not going under that shit at all, right? I'm not policing that shit at all. I'm not trying to put any order, any consequence to anybody's actions. Fuck it. And then it builds up. People get a sense of that freedom. They can do whatever the fuck they want. And then you just get this total collapse. And then the only response is to come down there and just bulldoze that shit, right? Because nobody has that sensitivity. People stop caring. They like, fuck that. I'm not sending a bunch of social workers down there to talk to a bunch of motherfucking meth heads, right? Which is the truth in certain places. The other, so that's the mental health police interface piece. Yes, we're gonna come with some type of solution, right? And it's gonna happen. You see it now. There are social workers showing up to mental health calls. There's things kind of being put in play. It's not the norm, I don't think. I know it's happening in New York, right? Like they have mental health are now being called out instead of police being called out and stuff like that. And I'm sure you're gonna have a set of consequences is going to stem from that, right? The other piece that you brought up, and I'll address this really quickly, is this kind of inconsistency, right? Where does that inconsistency come from, right? Now it is there, it's true, but where does it come from, right? And this is one thing for all you revolutionaries out there to kind of think about, right? Is it's not coming from a place of a lack of a moral compass, at least from my understanding. It's not coming from a morals and religions are actually pretty stable, right? They don't exhibit a certain sense of wild volatility that things are constantly changing. And there's changes of opinion, like Jesus is Jesus, Muhammad is Muhammad. There might be certain interpretations here and there, but even those interpretations seem to be pretty stable. Scientology is actually very stable. It's not a lot of changing of the God. It's the cult of personality, right? So not to say that there isn't, but what's the main source, right? The main source of the volatility comes from economics, right? It's the pricing of things. It's inflation. You're going to see a changing of opinion, a changing of a God overnight, bi-weekly, every month, every year, because prices are constantly shifting, right? So that's why I'm always a proponent of people kind of getting a general understanding of the stock market, right? You can look at the stock market, and if you look at it through a certain perspective, you can see how that's going to trickle down into some type of geopolitical army movement, some type of mental health piece, some type of social piece, some type of police. I would even say that you can trace a little bit of police brutality into certain things, not to read too much into the data. But the reason you have all this inconsistency and differences of opinion, right, is because niggas is living with 80, 90 different products in their house at any given time, right? Each of those products is coming from a different point of view with a different type of incentive, a different type of subscription package, a different type of this, a different type of update, a different type of that, a different type of user interface, which changes and updates and changes and updates, right? And so you get these different changes. If next week you got to deal with a completely new iPhone interface, right? And for a whole year, you've been dealing with this one. Now the fucking bar to put in the internet address is on the bottom versus at the top. You're going to change the way you do things, right? So I think that more of it comes from the way we interface with economics and basic kind of pricing models is where the inconsistency comes from, versus it's this religious piece. Oh, it's this war piece. Oh, it's this this newfound type of understanding of this indigenous relationship to these oil companies. Like that shit been like that for 80 years, right?
But sorry, go ahead.
No, that I'm to close it out, right? Like that volatility, right, of inconsistency and constantly shifting and jumping and superpositioning all over the place. I think it comes more from the markets, right? Relationship to products and prices.
All I was going to say is I think it's interesting that we discuss the inconsistencies, because out of all those things, it reminded me that there are lots of consistencies. Like they consistently will put a product over someone's life. So when you're in a capitalist society, what you get consistently is we don't make food to feed people. We make food to sell to people. If we can't sell it to you, we'll make it illegal for you to give it away for free. Let's take that a step farther, even though it pushes us into other territory now. We don't make medicine to make people healthy. we make medicine to sell to people. And if we can't sell it to people, then we don't care if they die.
Mm.
We don't make like food for you to be healthy. You know what I mean? If you want healthy food, then you have to pay an arm and a leg for it. I think what exists now is the beginning of the tiered levels of society. And I don't know if you and I could imagine that, because we've seen science fiction that touches on this, right? Like the Time Machine, the Morlocks and the Eloi. But is that so unrealistic now that there would be two groups of human beings and one of them would say, okay, I'm willing to do everything that the government says. I'm going to do this whole Elysium shit. I'm going to get every booster, every shot, everything, everything. And then there's another group of people that says, no, I don't want to live in a big city. I'm going to do this or do that. It's easy to see how thousands of years could separate those people. And the weird thing about science is that if just one fucking thing about those people as a whole, as an indigenous group, or as a separate subsection of another group of people, if one thing becomes different about you, right? If you can see in the dark better, as a whole, as a group, as a demographic, even, regardless of your skin color now, it becomes, okay, we have a new demographic point. You're not susceptible to these diseases, or you are more than another person. Then you enter the zone of actually splitting the human race. So what we've seen through the past few thousand years or 100,000 years is kind of a culling of all the other genuses of Homo sapien until we have the one that we have now. What we're actually looking at and seeing in real time, I believe, is the beginning of the splintering of what human beings will be in the future. And that's based not just on religion, but on diet, on medical choices. And irrespective of who survives, they're all going to have their story, like you said, based on why they did it. Some people as a constant and as something that we can consistently guarantee that they'll do is that very few times do human beings not want to create an overarching ideal or a religion or a faith or reality that they can then align themselves to. Because if it's just one person, then I have to align myself with the bloodline of that person. But if I'm in the same vein, if I carry the cross, so to speak, as this movement, then I then gain the followers and the support to be able to do that. And I think where we've seen society go now is that we will have that fundamental change, right? Like, how about this? Technology that exists now in this society is not made for people across the board. It's focused on helping out a very small subsection of a huge group of people, but it's focused on just them. They're not like the experiment that was the vaccine was their idea that they were going to help everyone. But we saw that through morality, even if the United States is saying everything's true, even if Biden is right about all this, which he's not, but even if he is, well, now you're blocking the vaccine from Cuba and from Venezuela, right? So we know that irrespective of whether you believe in it or not, you're doing things so that the people that you're diametrically opposed to can't get the help that you need. It's not communism that's taking over the world. It's that capitalism is failing. And I think that it's not revolution that socialists or leftists or even like people who are in the whole libertarian wing somewhere in the middle. I don't know if it's so much revolution that they should be preparing for, but I'll say this on the channel here. They might have to be preparing for apocalypse, for a way to build up out the ashes. And I don't mean the ashes like of a nuclear holocaust. I mean of an economic meltdown. Like you just said it yourself. A lot of these relationships rely upon that. When those strings get cut, well, I'll tell you right now, with the charity that we've had, there's been outages on, let's say, cereal. There's been outages on tuna. You know what I mean? I can see those in real time because I'll go to the store and they'll literally be like, hey, man, if you wanted these, you should have been here yesterday. And I'm like, well, you usually have 3 days worth of tuna. And he's like, well, this week we had 1 day worth of tuna. So this is why we keep a stockade. And I look at that. and I can read the signs. And
Mm.
realistically speaking, man, I'm not saying that, you know, a dark side is going to crash through your front door, that the sun's going to explode today. No, doesn't happen for a billion years. But what I'm saying is that no society lasts forever, and most certainly not one that's teetering like this after 200 some odd years. But people are married to this idea of eternal America. They want to keep it like the 1950s, and you literally can't. You want the sandwich to look the same that it's looked, and you want it to look like that forever. It won't. If you make a sandwich, all you got to do is wait 24 hours and look at that melted piece of fucking soggy bread and nastiness, but you want it to be that same 1956 sandwich. It's not that anymore. That shit is gone, yo. The one thing I'll leave you with this.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
interesting thing is I was reading up on the Kennedy assassination, and I wanted to say why do people hate him so much in the military? He actually did, and people, regardless of the fucked up things he did in Cuba and other shit, Kennedy reorganized the way the CIA worked and the way intelligence operations worked. That's why he was killed, a lot of people believe. He literally changed the way that they reported to things. You can't do things on your own anymore. You're not out there. In other words, they had a 9/11 when he was in there. Like before 9/11, motherfucker, we get on the plane with no ID. I know motherfuckers never had an ID, went to a plane. There was no Homeland Security. There was just LaGuardia Airport security. You weren't even a real cop. You didn't even have a fucking gun. I had one of my niggas knocked the dude out, and we walked out the place like there was nothing. Now you can't do that. So it's like that world changed. It turned into that. But then again, you have to ask yourself about consistency. Was it always that? Right? We talk about ancient human sacrifices in old Sumeria. We have human sacrifice right now. It's called what we did in Iraq. That was a human sacrifice. Even if we talk about the people that killed people in Iraq, what do they say about those troops when they don't come home? They say that they made the ultimate sacrifice. We have sacrifices every day in this society. We electrocuted a mentally ill man the other day. You know what I mean? We, believe me, for the wellness and well-being and stability of the society, offer up another sacrifice, another, you know, undereducated, or how about this? America's favorite, a black person who's on the edge of mental competency that they're going to execute. That's America's favorite, right? Debating the mental competency of that. But then when it comes to individuals that you look at and you're like, oh my God, the influenza kid, the other freak show. Now we, you know what I mean? Then it becomes that's the contrast to me. Right? It's not that I want them to be treated badly. It's that I want us to be treated with the same temerity and patience that you treat those people. You know what I mean? To say, hey man, you didn't have a crack era. You had an opioid epidemic that no one gave a shit about. Right? You didn't have so-called slavery be your history. You had slavery interrupt your history, right? For thousands of years. Right? You had these new terminologies that people invented, like you said, the new system, the new way of doing business, right? The racialized system was a new way of doing business. Oh well, I got a new position for you. It's a little bit above black people. We call it mulatto. And if you subscribe to this, then you can, you know, protect the infrastructure that is white supremacy while still claiming some part of your blackness. But you know, indigenous people have that too. It's called a mestizo, and it's a fraud. You know what I mean? It's saying I have some French, some fucking. We know. But at the same time, you don't have to take it to a carrot. You don't have to be shooting monkeys out of a tree with a blowgun to claim indigenous heritage. That's what people play games with us. They make it seem like you have to go to the extreme. How about learning a word or two in your native language? That's not a lot to ask. We don't say that you have to abandon society and modernity. I'm saying that people have to reclaim what's theirs without it being, you know what I mean, something that passes someone else's standard of what that is. You know?
So I guess in conclusion, there is, China's not running out of room.
Because because they'll take some more people's shit and put.
No, I know.
Yeah, and they're gonna go to Taiwan. Oh, believe me, they will go to Taiwan.
I know that. I know that for a fact. So I do work in China. China actually has a lot of room. The issue is that China's also one of the, one person will own 3 rooms, right? So there's a lot of like real estate. China's issue is its real estate. That's one of the elephant in the room. It's not necessarily space to put people and stuff like that. Actually, the border system within China, like you can't come into the cities. Like if you were born in the rural part or you worked in the rural part, you're not allowed to come into like Shanghai or the tier cities, tier 1, tier 2 cities, without permission from the government, specifically to kind of stem certain things. It's not like there's no room, right? It's just that they don't want to have these kind of situations that you have in places like, say Manila, right? We just have a hyper concentration of in the urban space for whatever reason. So that there's a method to the madness, but I don't think it's necessarily that there's a space issue, right? China is actually very, very large. But I hear what you're saying, that some of the expansions that they're doing, at least for Taiwan, is specifically national kind of a piece. It's really just an other to kind of beat up on for the sake of maintaining the stability internally, right? To give them somebody to pick on outside of the system. And it's the perfect enemy because it has a history. There's rhetoric. You can go back 100 years and it's still an issue, and you can beat up on Chiang Kai-shek and blah, 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 blah. So there's that piece. The sacrificial piece, there's always been sacrifice in every even indigenous nations, right? There's always been sacrifice, but it was sacrifice for different reasons. So it wasn't that human sacrifice was this kind of taboo thing. It was just like, what was it for, right? So even though that name's not the Aztecs, that's the name that they gave them, right? But those kind of indigenous folks, the person that they would sacrifice, they would make them a god for a year, right? Like you would live as a god for a year. They would dress you up in the.
You wouldn't live at all, but your corpse would be hoisted up there for the benefit of the state. Yes,
they would carry you around on the sedan chairs, right? Like you would get treated like a god for a year. They turned you into a god in order for your sacrifice to mean something, right? So it wasn't they was just let's just grab this regular nigga and slice his head off because your blood doesn't have any value. Your hair doesn't have any value. Your soul doesn't have a value like that. So they had to kind of impose on you a certain type of ritualization to deify you, and then they would sacrifice you, right? So there's layers and complexities to it, again, that I kind of, to introduce to the folks in the chat, that the knowledge of that stuff is there. And you brought it up before, you got to be very careful when you start comparing kind of societies in different ages to the now, or comparing societies to this society for whatever your general purpose is right now, because of the consequences of that, right? Again, the consequences of closing down the asylums for the sake of the freedom of its patients, but then you release them to a world that really don't give a fuck about them, right?
Which is why a lot of them ended up in jail.
Yeah, a lot of them end up in jail. A lot of them end up in the streets on Skid Row. A lot of them end up just lost in the sauce, right? And now we're trying to figure out what these interventions are. And so the police was like, well, we got an intervention. If you niggas ain't finna do shit, we finna fuck these motherfuckers up, right? And then it becomes, nah, well, we don't want to do that. Like, we don't want y'all to do that. We want you to do this, right? And I think people are going to learn over the next few years on how to do that, and I applaud the people that's doing the social work to go out there and interface and intervene in those situations. And I hope that's what defunding the police means, and refunding kind of these other mental health pieces. In terms of just like the secrets and corporate secrecy and stuff like that, I guide people to just kind of do the due diligence. There's places like Market Watch, right? There's places like Bloomberg News, right? Where you can read the prospectuses of these companies. So you can read the quarterly earnings and the prospectus of this new company that just launched that has this biotech, whatever, right? And they'll fucking tell you, like, this is what we're doing. They're very blunt about it. And what you got to consider is they don't really give a fuck about you because you're not going to invest in them, right? You're looking at it from a that's the evils of the world. I need to figure out how to fight you type shit. but they're talking to the people that they're trying to invest, that want that, like, we want your dollar, right? And when you look at, well, who's those people that we're talking about, it's those nurses, right? It's those teachers. It's the teacher that you send your kid to school to be taught her 401k, right? Or her kind of investment plan is tied up in these mutual funds, right? Which are constantly looking for returns, right? To make sure that they have a, what they call that shit when you retire, a pension, right? So they're very open and blunt about what they're doing, why they're doing it, because they have to attract these teachers' pensions and these fire pensions and these social worker pensions and these government employee pensions and these healthcare worker pensions and all these things. So again, it's not that they're keeping shit from you because they're in the Illuminati. That's another story. But you kind of got to you got to take yourself out of, I'm gonna just focus on 2 or 3 news outlets, 2 or 3 platforms, 2 or 3 people that I like that are charismatic, 2 or 3 Lupes and Immortal Texts, and really get you 7 to 8, you know, and half of them motherfuckers don't agree with you, to really get a full scope of the story if you out here really trying to do damage to this system. You feel me? That's all I got.
And I think it's not just damage to the system. I think it's also making sure that people recognize just how backwards it's been for a long time, and that a lot of times when people look at it and say, oh man, this is the most oppressive time now, you can look back and say, no, I can find plenty of times within the course of this country where things have been a lot more fucked up. And I think that, you know, coming in closing, I think we both agree that America has its own unique horrors to show the world, and also it's interesting perspective in the way it merged or tried to merge democracy and capitalism, which didn't work out very successfully. You know what I mean? One obviously overtook the other. And when you look at that, you have to ask yourself, okay, in a political system, isn't that exactly what's going on with every single other one that you've seen? One overtook the other, right? Trying to control capitalism, trying to control communism through a regime, through a government, achieves nothing. It's like trying to regulate social media. You can't. You just, in many ways, it's dependent on so many other foreign markets, right? Like if you're actually a powerful government, you could stifle the growth of a nation, not because it's capitalist or communist, but because you just don't agree with them. You don't want them to be successful. And that's basically what we've come to terms with now, that there are certain countries that are allied with other countries. We do not want them to be successful. If they're successful, that means that their counterpart is not going to be as successful. Our counterpart for them is not going to be as successful. Therefore, the morals are out the window. But if we want to go back in time, is that morality being out the window? Is that also consistency too? When the Hebrews came upon the Canaanites, what conversation did they have in the Bible? We getting these people out of here and we're killing everyone and taking their shit. A great sacrifice has to be made, right? After the people escaped Egypt, in the Bible, it says that God sacrificed half of them. Have to be, in other words, that's got to be the fucked up part. Just the closer. God showed you all these miracles. That's the interesting part of the Bible that the Old Testament. It's a story that says after you're shown everything, the frogs coming out the sky, that wasn't enough for you, right? The water opening up, that wasn't enough for you. All the metaphors are there. All the sky raining fire, every firstborn child dying, that didn't convince you. You being released from slavery, that didn't convince you. You was lost in the desert and you peed your pants and you invented a god to worship because you were scared of the dark, and now you got to get handled. You know what I mean? That's consistent too. Occultism, the sacrifice, the idea that this country is based on an ideal that is unachievable, a perfection, a utopia, that it was the best it could have possibly been, that there's no other way it could have been better, is part of the mythology of the United States. Like almost like Plato's Republic, where you have to create an ideal that isn't true, that couldn't be true. And the beautiful thing is that it's so untrue that at the end of the day, you're not even concerned with what people got wrong about it. You're concerned with how it's used in the future. Case in point, there's an interesting theory. It's on the internet. I've seen it on a couple of people's pages. It's called Caesar's Messiah, right? And the theory is the idea that Julius Caesar and other people in Rome actually had written about the idea of inventing a Messiah for a new religion. Now, that doesn't mean that Christianity. See, again, this is where people take one little piece of something and run with it. Oh, Caesar invented Jesus. No, it's the idea that if this were to happen organically, and we can't make it happen inorganically, which we prefer, then we have to control the flow of what it is, right? Saying, hey, man, we can't control the world politics, right? We can't control the world market. But if we can control enough parts of the world, we can direct the world market to where we need it to be. So we're not as teeter-tottering as other people. And as soon as someone does something we don't like, we push their little world market and teeter. Oh, so one year you have a good year in Namibia, but this year, not a good year, right? There we go. Anyway, man.
A pleasure to be
always a pleasure, man.
To your fucking madness.
I'm coming back to Los Angeles November 12th. I'll be out there.
Hit my line, sir.
I'm gonna hit you.
All right, love, brother.
All right, man. I love y'all. Thank you very much for coming through, everybody. We appreciate you. To Immortal Fiasco.
Hey.
Peace, everybody.
La paz.
1.